welcome to The Same Page, the podcast by The Moon, a feminist bookstore in Singapore's Chinatown. We're a space specializing in books from women authors, authors of marginalized genders, authors of color, and authors not represented in the Anglo-American centers of publishing. I'm Ruby, I'm the book curator at The Moon, and today I'm going to be speaking to Sarah, who's the owner and founder of The Moon, and my boss. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Ruby.
So, let's talk about why you decided to start the space.
Wow, that's a very loaded question, and one that I have answered several times over the course of the 2 years of running this business. Where would you like me to start? With what inspired me to open the business, or why I feel the need for something like this to exist?
Aren't they the same question?
Not really. One is about what inspired, what sparked the birth of The Moon, and one is like the overarching need for something like this.
Yeah, I guess, did you see a gap in like the bookstore market in Singapore, or was it just I really like books, let me do this?
It was a little bit of both. Mm-hmm. So I had been in Singapore, I've been in Singapore for almost 11 years, and I never really felt like I found a place for myself where I fit in, where I belong, where I could meet people of the same mindset. And I really love books. I love reading. I love talking about books. And I just decided that, when the inspiration came, that this would be the ideal way to marry my two interests together. And I was very lucky that everything worked out. And here we are with The Moon.
What are the two interests, books and
connecting with people?
Oh, okay. So you were talking also about like the philosophy behind the space. I mean, in the spiel that I did at the beginning, I talked about us being a pretty niche bookstore for books by a certain demographic. Oh, actually, let me backtrack. I don't think that our books are by a certain demographic. I think that the books that usually can be found in bookstores are by a certain demographic. And our books are pretty much everybody outside of it. Like, I don't think of the authors as a niche group. It's so ridiculous to be like, authors of color are a niche group when they are most of the writers in the world.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, did you see like a philosophical reason to start this
A little
space?
bit, and part of it was led by actually my observation of a bookshelf of philosophy books. So this was after the year that I graduated from LaSalle. I did my thesis on representation of women in modern media. So I was seeing a lot of inequality in everywhere I looked. It was something that was really top of my mind, and I ended up taking a trip back home for a couple of weeks to Lahore. And I was at one of my favorite bookstores that I spent a lot of time growing up. I was looking at their philosophy section, and it was very glaringly obvious that there was not a single female philosopher. And before I got, really annoyed at the bookstore and the owner, I was like, why don't they have any female, philosophers represented there? My very next thought was, well, actually, I can't even name any myself. So it's a little bit of self-reflection. Like, are you making conscious decisions to diversify what you're reading, or are you just like happy with what is presented to you and you're open to like just consuming that? That kind of got me to reflect on my own bookshelf, music I was listening to, the films that I was watching, and to put a little bit more thought into who are the people who are creating these things and what is their intention, what is the agenda behind, and how is it informing my view of the world. And that made it very obvious to me that what I was consuming wasn't as diverse as I would like it to be. And it was a very limited viewpoint that I was consuming. And that's pretty much what inspired, the philosophy behind The Moon, that it's not to say that books by, white authors or white men aren't good. It's just that we see so much of that everywhere else that we go. And it's not to say that you can't find a lot of the stuff that we stock at The Moon at Kinokuniya. You can. It's just that it gets buried in everything else that you are seeing. And the curated selection of The Moon is meant to be a way for you to step away from everything else and maybe pick up something that you might not pick up in another bookstore.
Yeah, I also just want to clarify that we do stock white male authors.
We do.
This is a question that we get a lot in store from people who aren't regulars. Like, they'll walk in and I'll give them the spiel about what the bookstore is, and they'll go like, oh, you guys are racist and or sexist because you don't have white male authors. But we do stock.
And also reverse racism isn't a thing, guys.
Yeah, I think like to say reverse racism, you have to be a little bit more sophisticated. Some people are just straight up like, you guys are racist. No, but we do. I do enjoy a lot of books by, white male authors. We just brought in Cat's Cradle by Kurt Vonnegut, which is one of my all-time favorite books. And I know one of your favorite books is Dune.
Oh, absolutely. I adore Dune.
Yeah. And so we're not like angry feminists who are like, oh, men suck, white people suck, let's not read this stuff anymore. It's more like, it's so great that they've been given the chance to publish and write and have like the machinery of the publishing industry behind them for like decades, right? But where are the same opportunities for writers who don't fit that demographic? And for us, it's more like a place to highlight the books that you wouldn't necessarily find elsewhere.
Yeah, I think you summed it up pretty nicely.
Thank you. It's my job.
You're very good at your job.
I know that last year you were doing a reading challenge where you only read women of color writers. Am I right?
Yep, that's correct.
Yeah, how did that go?
It went really well, but there were a couple of hitches along the way. I am not a big fan of leaving books unfinished, and I think last year was the first time that I had to accept that it's okay to leave books unfinished. That revelation has kind of changed my reading world, but there were a few like self-deprecating moments when I'm like, what's wrong with me? Why can't I finish this book? I set this challenge for myself. But you know what? I think life is too short to finish a book that you're not enjoying. And that's been a big part of my reading list this year, where I am accepting that it's okay to leave books unfinished and pass them on to somebody who will appreciate them more than I do.
I'm a bit concerned because I asked you, like, have you been reading women of color writers? And you were like, yeah, but it's also the first time I've not finished a book. Is there a reason why?
I think part of that is because there's so many different things and so many different genres that I've had to branch into. Normally, before I opened this business, I was very comfortable in my niche. I will pick things that I know I'm going to like, so it's very easy for me to finish them. But with this challenge, not only am I, reading only women of color, I'm also being forced out of my comfort zone into different genres. And that's, I think, what led me to not finishing certain titles.
So how would you describe your reading comfort zone?
I like science fiction. Yeah. I like fantasy. I like something that takes me away from the day-to-day reality that I have to face. So something that I can just kind of lose myself into. Because I think a lot of with other kinds of readings that I'm doing, whether it's like something that's self-help or a business book, you're constantly thinking of ways that you can apply that knowledge into your life. So you're thinking into, like, there's two layers to what you're reading. One is what you're reading on the spot, and one is how can I make this useful? But with something that's science fiction or fantasy, there's none of that. You're completely losing yourself into that new world that's being built. And for me, that's always been a great form of escape all through my childhood growing up. That was a genre that I always enjoyed. So I'm learning how to break myself out of these like comfort zones and read things that will enrich me in different ways.
Have you discovered new like female science fiction fantasy writers in the course of the challenge, or just in the course of like working here?
I have. I can't name any at the top of my list because I read a lot of books, but I have several, and I think we can jot them down at the end.
I think I'm very familiar with your bookshelf, so I know that you have read The Priory of the Orange Tree.
I've just started it.
Yeah. Oh wow, I'm good. And let me think. What else has Sarah read? You read Octavia Butler?
A long time ago. Yeah. We brought in one of her books for an event that we did a couple of years ago, like I think in 2018.
Yeah, we think we're trying to be a little bit stronger on genre fiction. I think it's very easy to find women writers in general fiction because it's not like closed off to women. Yeah. But in genre writing, like science fiction or fantasy, obviously there are like standout female writers, but by and large, the famous writers are still men. And I think maybe that's why, like, when you were breaking out of your zone, it was a bit hard to find.
I think so. I mean, if you go on any like book blog or something like that and try to look, what's the next book that I read? It's mostly white men who are being talked a lot about in terms of what science fiction book or fantasy book that you can read. And one specific example I can give is Brandon Sanderson. He is a fantastic writer, and he continued the Wheel of Time series after the original author, Robert Jordan, I think, passed away. And he started his own series of a very ambitious novel that he was writing. And I read a couple of his, and I really enjoyed his books. But every time I went onto an online blog or a platform to search for something else to read, his name kept popping up. And it was frustrating after a certain point because he's a great writer, but he's not the only writer who's writing something worthy of the genre. And it was a bit frustrating for me because I couldn't really see anybody else who got that same level of appreciation as he did.
Yeah. So how do you go onto blogs a lot to look for new books to read?
I try not to. By and large, ever since I opened the bookstore, it's been a lot of whatever we get in the store. I try to read that. Occasionally, I will take a trip to Kinokuniya and pick up something that I see off the shelves. I'm not much of a recommend me a book person. I try to figure it out on my own. But lately, I have been taking recommendations from you specifically because you seem to know my reading habits so well.
Yeah, Sarah's very predictable when it comes to reading
a little
books.
bit, yeah.
If it's a book set in South Asia with a strong female protagonist, I can probably sell it to you.
Probably. And I think a big part of the reason is that growing up, I didn't really have a lot of books like that. There were not very many South Asian female protagonists, and especially based in South Asia. There were a couple of books that I read with South Asian female protagonists based in the UK or based in the US, talking about the immigrant experience living in those countries. But there was very few that I read that looked like the lives that I was living.
Oh, so can you tell me what books now kind of represent that experience? I know that you're a big fan of Nimita's Place.
Oh my god, Nimita's Place was one of the best books that I've read in the past couple of years. I recommended it to my mom. And me recommending a book to my mom has to mean that it's great because she is so picky with anything that she reads.
So just for context, Nimita's Place is written by Akshita Nanda, who is a friend of the Moon. We've hosted her book launch. We actually discussed Nimita's Place at our first ever book club. Mm-hmm. So we're very fond of her. And maybe you want to give us a summary of the book?
Sure, I'd love to. So Nimita's Place is set... It tells the story of two women who have the same name. One is Nimita, who is living in Lahore pre-partition, and one is her granddaughter, Nimita, who is living in Singapore in present day. I think the book was released in 2016, so 2016. And the story kind of follows the struggles and challenges that the two women face in their lives. And I think what I particularly enjoyed about this title was I don't really get to experience my home city in the way that I would have liked to. And seeing Nimita's experiences in pre-partition Lahore kind of gave me an insight into the kind of lives that my grandmothers and, ancestors would have experienced. And it was a very heartbreaking story because my family experienced partition and moved over from Amritsar to Punjab on the Pakistan side. And what Nimita experiences is the exact opposite, where she has to leave her home in Lahore and move to India, to Delhi. And it's a story that so many people went through, and I know nothing about it from my family because that history, that records, we don't have any of that. So it was a particularly heartbreaking story for me because I got to gain an insight into the day-to-day lives of, all these women that came before us. And then I obviously live in Singapore, and the present-day Nimita is based in Singapore. So it's very relatable from that aspect as well. So Nimita's Place is a fantastic book, and I think I've read it twice already.
Oh, really?
I read it again, yeah.
It's a fat book.
It was a fat book, but I've read it twice, and I think it's one that I will continue reading again and again. I think I would like to read it while I'm back home as well, just to see if that changes my perspective. I think... The physical location of where you are when you're consuming something does have an impact on your experience of it. And I felt that with books that I've read back home, which were set in Lahore or in Pakistan or in India, I felt differently about it as opposed to if I'm reading it in Singapore.
Yeah, I remember I had the book on my shelf for years Well, at least since it's been published. And you told me you really liked it, so I picked it up. And as I was reading it, you came in and you were like, oh my god, I know where that is. You know, my house in Pakistan is just like down the street from this thing that she mentions. And it's really unique experience to actually recognize yourself in literature. Or at least I grew up reading a lot of things that were very British. And then I progressed into like very American books. And it was a while. I think my first Singlit book was a Catherine Lim book. I think she's fallen out of fashion in the Singlit community. So I can't remember much about the book. It's been a very long time since I read anything by her. But definitely was surprised to be like, oh, I don't have to imagine what this looks like. You know, when you're like growing up and you're reading kids' books set in Britain, right? Like Enid Blyton's.
Oh my god, I read all of Enid Blyton books growing up.
Right, and I'm just like, what is a toadstool? Like, what? You know, like, what? Where is Dover? Like, we have Dover, but it's not the same thing.
Dover
you know?
MRT?
Exactly, like, we don't have the cliffs of Dover. And it was so much extra filling in the blanks sort of work that you had to do, which I'm not mad about. I do think that, like, it's so powerful to let literature transport you to different places. And I think it's good for kids to stretch their imagination every now and then. But the first few times I read Singlit was very illuminating, I think. Like, oh, there can be books written where I live, which is such a stupid thing to say.
Yeah.
Like, obviously there can be, but you know.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. I think that one of the Enid Blyton books that I read a lot was the Mallory Tower series. Where there's like,
they're in like a boarding school.
In a boarding school. And I remember going to my parents and being like, why can't you send me to a boarding school?
Oh my god,
too?
I asked my parents if they could send me to a boarding school. And they were like, what boarding school?
Like, what
Singapore
is that?
is so small, where do you want to go?
Wow.
Yeah, they weren't for it. But definitely like it was such a aspirational thing. Or like I read the Babysitters Club so much when I was a kid, and I kept asking my parents like, oh, why don't I have a babysitter? And they're like, what do you think your life is? And just like being at the store and getting to meet customers, I hear the same story over and over again from customers where I'll recommend like a Singlit book. Let me think. What have I recommended recently? Oh, I'm a big fan of Jeremy Tiang's writing. So he wrote a short story collection, It Never Rains on National Day. And he also wrote this novel called The State of Emergency. Oh, no, State of Emergency. No, the in the beginning. And one of them is set in present-day Singapore, and one of them is historical. And I recommend them over and over again to customers. And if they're regulars, they'll come back and they'll be like, oh my god, I've never read anything like that before. I've never read historical literature set in Singapore. I learned so much about my own political history, and it was also just very cool to have characters and recognize them and go like, oh, this could be someone that I passed on the street, you know. Yeah, and I think like another writer that really encapsulates that is Bali.
Oh, I love her.
I know. I've literally read all of her books. Bali Kaur Jaswal, she's written 2 books set in Singapore, Inheritance and Sugar Bread. And both of them are about Sikh families in Singapore. It's not a demographic that is huge in Singapore. And I think she might be one of the only writers writing from that perspective.
I think
writing
so.
fiction from that perspective.
I think so. I haven't read Sugar Bread, but I've read Inheritance.
Oh my gosh, you have to read Sugar Bread.
It's been on my list forever. And I read her other 2 novels, which was Erotic Stories for Punjabi Widows and The Unlikely Adventures of the Shergill Sisters. And with all of her books, whether they're set in Singapore or somewhere else, like the moment you pick it up, you know you're not going to stop until you are done with the book. Like I read very fast, but I read all of her books so fast. I couldn't get through them fast enough. And I think that she has this way of bringing her characters to life that I find a bit rare in South Asian writers. The qualities that they depict, it's very like she could be writing about my cousins or my sister or my mom or my aunts. Like it's that relatable.
Oh yeah, her characters are incredibly real. I remember when I was reading Erotic Stories for Punjabi Widows, I think I stayed up till like 3 or 4 in the morning. So I started the book pretty late.
A sign of a good book.
Yeah, and then I was like, oh, I need to keep reading. I need to know what's happening to the characters. And I've forgotten their names at this point, but I do think about them every now and then. Like I can sort of picture... so the plot of the book, I don't want to give too much away, but you can tell from the title that
what it is.
You can kind of tell that Punjabi widows are involved. So the main character is a young woman. She's South Asian and British.
Part of the Sikh community in London.
Yes, yeah. And she finds herself becoming a writing instructor to a bunch of old widows, and they start writing erotic stories. I think that's all you need to know.
Yeah. It was a very funny book.
Yeah, and I can like picture the room that they're in. I can picture all of these like old ladies wearing, you know, like traditional clothing, making faces at each other. She's such a vivid writer, and I feel that way about all of her books. And every time I sell her book to a customer, they'll come back and they'll say like, I didn't even know that I could read something like this.
Yeah.
Which is a bit sad to think that it's like 2020 and there are still people who've not read books set in their own cities or in their own communities.
Yeah. There was another similar-ish series targeted towards like young adults that I read growing up. I don't recall the name of the author. It was such a long time ago. But I remember the title of the first book was called Bindi Babes. And it was about these three Punjabi sisters living in the UK, and their mum had passed away. And their dad was trying to be, you know, a good parent, but like not try to bring people home or not date. And then these three girls are kind of dealing with their Indian identity, the fact that their mum has just passed away, and being, you know, British citizens. And I found them so funny, but they were very rare. Like I remember looking for books like that when I was growing up, and they were few and far between. So when I read Bali's books, it reminded me of a little bit of a adult version of those books.
Oh yeah, I can see that. I think her latest book, The Adventures of the Shergill Sisters, is about three sisters going on a trip together, and their mother has just passed away, and they're, you know, figuring out how to be adults, figuring out how to love each other. It's a very sweet, turbulent story, I guess. It's a great road book. Like, they're taking this giant road trip around India. Yeah. It is really special to read books that kind of like strike you close to home. But the interesting thing about that book is I have never been to India.
And I've never been to India either.
What, really?
I can't. I would not. I applied for a visa a couple of years ago to go for a friend's wedding, and I got rejected. And then the relations between the two countries are so tense, usually all of the time, that I don't think that, at least in my lifetime, I'm going to be able to get to go to India.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. That like small details really ruin the mood.
Oh no, I'm so sorry about that. I mean, I didn't mean it in
about like the weight of political history.
It is a lot. I think that I feel like, you know, coming back to Nimita's Place and Bali's books as well, like I really appreciate these books because they give me an insight into our shared history. And if you come from a place like Pakistan or India and you've grown up, you know, and you've gone to school in these countries, you'll know that the education that we receive is so biased, and so it just gives you one perspective. Like growing up, we didn't learn much about Indian history or our collective history. It was a lot about Pakistan and what it meant to be Pakistani. And then it wasn't until I moved to Singapore in 2010 and I became friends with a bunch of girls from Bombay that were in the same course as me that we learned that, oh, we actually speak the same language. Hindi and Urdu is spoken almost the same, or how similar we are. And what we're taught is so vastly different, even though like less than what partition happened like 60, 70 years ago. I mean, my grandfather was born in India, so that's not that long ago.
Oh yeah, mine too.
Yeah.
Really not that long ago. But what I was saying about like not having been to India, which I guess is a shared experience that we have, is even though the place is unfamiliar to me, if you read a good book, you feel like you're being brought right there. Yeah. And I almost felt like it was a bit of my story, even though it really wasn't.
Yeah. So we don't really know exactly what our family was before partition, but either they were Hindu or either they were Sikh. So reading Bali's books actually, and even Nimita's Place, gave me an insight into what it could have been. What it could have been like had my family been Hindu before they converted to Islam and moved, or what it could have been like had they been Sikh and moved over or had to convert. And I really, really like treasure those insights, because the reality is I'm never going to know.
Yeah, you're never going to know. And I think maybe that's why you and I are so attracted to reading.
Yeah.
We're always reading several books at the same time. And it's the transportive quality of literature.
And generally, Ruby and I tend to have very different takes.
Oh, yeah, we do not read the same books.
Really, we don't.
Or if we do, we have very different opinions on the books.
Yeah.
It's like rare that we like the same book. So us talking about Bali's books is really quite special.
Yeah.
Mostly, I think, I can tell if you're going to like a book. And I can also tell in the same moment that I'm not going to like it.
There was this book that Ruby was ordering books in a couple of weeks ago, and she sent me a screenshot. And I think the book was titled Well-Behaved Indian Women, and we have it in stock at the store at the moment. And she sent it to me, and she's like, oh, I think you'll like this. And I'm like, you don't know me. Why do you keep sending me all these South Asian books? And then the book came in store, and I forgot about that incident. And I picked it up, and she was standing next to me, and I'm like, oh, I think I'll read this. And the look on her face... I try not to be predictable, but it's okay.
No, I'm very good at my job. This
is also true.
Very clairvoyant. We're having a tea break. One second.
Sorry. There's a lot of talking happening.
I actually wanted to ask you, do you feel like your reading habits have changed since the moon opened?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I'm reading a lot more books that are translated from their original language, which really? I don't think I was very aware of prior to opening the moon. And it's something that's really changed the way that I understand how I read a book, because I think that the original language obviously has a different impact than it does when it's a translated copy. So that's one thing that's changed a lot. As much as I don't like to admit this, I do end up reading a lot of self-help and business books, because it obviously helps inform my decisions of how to strategize and like how to take my business forward. So that is something that I don't enjoy, but it's something that I learn a lot from, and I value that experience.
Can you actually tell us about some of the translated books that you've enjoyed?
Ooh, let me think.
You on the spot.
You really have. I should have prepped a list.
You should have come prepared.
Oh no, I didn't know you were going to ask me that question.
You didn't think I was going to ask you about books on a book?
I didn't think you were going to ask me about what translated books I've read in the past few years. But I don't know if it's translated. I think it's translated. The one that we both read recently, Untold Day and Night.
Untold Night and Day, yes. It's by Baeswa, and it was translated from Korean.
Yeah, I did not enjoy it.
Oh, I loved it.
I know. You had a very different perspective on it than I did. It was very dreamy, and I think that was the intended effect. But I was not enjoying it at all. The process of reading it gave me a headache, because I kept bouncing back and forth between the different metaphors that she was using.
Yeah.
And it just was not something that I was very comfortable with.
So just to explain the book briefly, if you've not heard of it, it's set in Korea, and you're following the protagonist who kind of doesn't really have much going on in her life. She was working at a cinema for a while, and then the cinema kind of closes down, and then a bunch of mysterious things happen in her life. And really, it's not a very plot-driven book. It is the sort of book that I think is more for atmosphere than for plot. And I think at some point, I guess the timelines start to double onto themselves, and things keep reoccurring, and things keep happening in patterns and in sets. And I found that a really fascinating way to write a book. But I think I tend to but I really enjoy atmosphere books. So Baeswa, definitely going to check out anything else that she's written. One of my other favorite writers, Deborah Levy, is also the same kind of writer, where I can tell you what the book is about, but it's almost not important. I think what's more important is I've described her prose to people as metallic, which I think is maybe the best way, because I chose the word.
I get that, but I am somebody, I've learned this through the process of these new books that I'm trying to read, that while I enjoy world building and atmospheric, I need it to go somewhere. I need to have a plot. I need to be able to follow a protagonist and their story in a maybe not specifically linear way, but something that is less dreamy than this particular book was.
You want a payoff.
Kind of, yeah. And I know that that's like not a very positive way to think about a book, but that's just what I enjoy. And Ruby mentioned that Dune is one of my favorite books, and I think that that's one particular book that I feel very strongly about. I've had people that I've recommended this book to me come to be like, it was so slow, it was so dry, that nothing was happening, and I can kind of see that. But to me, it's a lot about world building, and they're telling you about this new society, this new culture, this new planet. So for me, that world building and that atmospheric thing is definitely something I enjoy, but maybe in a slightly less romantic or dreamy way than Basewell's book was.
Yeah, I'm actually reading Dune now. Sarah lent me
It's been 3 months.
Ouch. Ouch. Okay, so Sarah lent me a giant hardcover edition of Dune at the beginning of the Circuit Breaker. And I think I only really got into it 2 weeks ago. Because I had a lot of books to get through, and I was really depressed when I was inside. I didn't really feel like breaking into this giant book.
It is intimidating to look at.
Yeah, like you open it and it starts with it doesn't start, but there's a big glossary at the end where they try and explain all the words, and there are maps and there's family trees, and I thought oh my god, I don't know if I have the energy for it, but I have started it. I'm actually not sure how the book system works, but I'm done with Dune. The first one. Okay. And the second one, I think, is Muad'Dib or something.
Yeah.
However you say it.
Yeah.
So I'm in between those two now.
So the way that the book is structured is that the first half of it is setting the stage, and the second half is all the characters owning the roles that they've established in the first half of it. So the second half is really where the story the action picks up.
I am surprised at how much I'm enjoying the book. Really didn't strike me as the kind of book that I would necessarily gravitate towards. I don't read a lot of classic science fiction. But I get why you like it. I do understand the appeal of the world building, because I think maybe the first 5 pages I'm just kind of figuring out, what is happening here? What rules of our world still apply, and what rules are new? And there's so much new vocabulary that you have to pick up. But once you get the hang of it, it's kind of
So I was introduced to Dune through a documentary that one of my lecturers in college showed us. It's called Jodorowsky's Dune, and it's about this documentary that this film that this Mexican director called Alejandro Jodorowsky wanted to make about Dune. And he was this really experimental filmmaker. And my professor showed us this documentary, and I was so inspired by this person and his passion for this book that he hadn't even read.
He hadn't read it?
He hadn't read it, which was the funniest thing in the world to me, that he put 3 years of his life and all this money into this project, and he'd never read the book.
So what, did someone just tell him the story?
Yeah, someone was like, I love your work and I want to make a film. And he said, yeah, let's just do Dune. And it became this crazy thing, this project where he got this team of individuals to come together and basically hand illustrate the entire film, what would have been the entire film. And that documentary is still something that I watch actually every couple of months when I'm feeling in a bit of a creative slump, because his energy and his passion for what he wanted to create with this film is so inspiring that I was like, okay, I really want to read this book. And then I ended up reading the entire series.
All 6?
All 6 of them.
Wow. So you decided that you would one-up Jodorowsky.
Pretty much.
I will make the film and I will read the
Pretty
book.
much. Okay. There is a new film coming out this year.
So I don't like Timothée Chalamet. And the whole time I was reading it, I was like, I can't believe he is going to be the...
He gets to play this, yeah. So in the what would have been this film that Jodorowsky made, he actually trained his own son to play the role of Paul. And he put him through hours of grueling martial arts training to be ready to play this role. And then the film just never ended up getting made. So I found that particular bit of the whole thing that, really inspired me, that despite the fact that this film never got made, the impact of that team that came together can be still seen in film to this day. Because that team then took those ideas that they worked on and they went to work on projects like Alien. They went to work on projects like Star Wars and what's the one with, oh my God, I forgot the name of it. But a whole bunch. Sorry? No. That was a bad joke, Ruby. Indiana Jones. Yeah.
Oh, what? Okay. Yeah. I guess desert.
I don't know. I mean, it was a lot of like the way that he was planning to shoot this film, and those particular scenes. He actually all of these people then ended up going and working on these other projects and taking that creative inspiration into the rest of the work that they did. So in the documentary, they describe Dune as the greatest film that was never made because it has such a big impact on the film industry to follow.
Which also makes it the greatest book that he never read.
Pretty much.
Yeah. Wow. I do love books. When books come out and have like movie spin-offs, do you watch the movies?
Sometimes. So there was one book, again, which you loved and I was not a big fan of. We had it at the store.
What are you going to say?
Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead.
Yeah.
Did I get it right?
Yeah.
I always get the title wrong.
It's a very long title. This book is by Olga Tokarczuk. I think I got her last name right. I think she's Polish.
She is Polish.
She won the Nobel Prize for Literature last year, and this book is about an eccentric old lady who is trying to solve a series of murders, in her small town, village. Very charming old lady, but the prose is very dense. I think she's a very
It's translated as well, right?
Yeah, but she's a very like stylized writer, and I get why you weren't having it, because it's kind of like whacking through the weeds with a
little bit. I mean, the premise of the book was something that I was really interested in, and you and Elaine raved about the book so much that I really wanted to give it a shot.
Elaine works with us. Elaine is the tarot reader at the Moon.
Yes, and she takes all of the beautiful photos that you see on our Instagram feed. And I was really intrigued by the concept, but I found the book very difficult to get through. And it's not a very fat book. It's pretty reasonably sized. And I'm generally a fast reader, but it took me like a week and a half to get through this book.
Most people would be happy with that kind of timing.
Yeah, I was not very happy with myself. And then I looked up the book and found that there's a film, a Polish film called Spoor, Spoor. And I decided to watch it. And oh my gosh, the film, in my opinion, was so much better as an experience than the book was for me, because it really built the tension in the way that I felt like the book wasn't able to. So in this case, I felt like the film was better than the book. But I'm interested to see what you think, because I know you mentioned that you wanted to watch the film as well.
Yeah, I actually don't watch movies anymore. I just have so many books to read. And I feel a bit aggrieved that the movie is telling me how fast to enjoy it. You know, it's like a film is a time-based art form, and I like having the flexibility that you get with books. But yeah, maybe I'll have a look. So Sarah and I put together a reading challenge last year. I think it's literally called the Moon Reading Challenge.
Pretty much.
I don't think we came up with a better name than that. But it's 25 prompts. And you're invited to check off the different prompts as you go through the year, and hopefully you end up reading like 25 or even more books a year. That's roughly around 2 a month.
Yeah.
And one of the prompts is to read a book that has been turned into a movie.
Yeah.
Have you been doing the challenge actually?
I haven't been checking it off, but I have been trying to pick books based on it. So I think I'll go through what I've read this year and see what else is missing now.
Yeah, I've been doing the challenge. I'm usually a pretty free flow kind of reader.
Yeah,
I don't
same.
really want to be told what to do. But I decided to do the challenge because I wrote it. And it has actually pushed me out of my comfort zone a bit. There are some prompts you were like, oh, a book that helps you improve yourself.
Yeah.
Which could be an invitation for self-help, or could be an invitation for something else. Or, books that help you change the world. So you're like invited to read nonfiction, fiction across different genres.
I think the one prompt that I'm actually really looking forward to, but also a bit nervous about, is the pick up something that you have left before, that you've started reading and that you didn't finish. And I think that I have so many books like that where I start and I'm like, okay, I will get to this at some point, and then it just adds into my pile of one day I will finish these. I haven't abandoned it yet. So I think I'm looking forward to seeing what I can pull out from that and see, okay, maybe I wasn't in the right headspace to appreciate what the author is trying to say.
When do you decide when to put a book down and give up?
Oh, that's such a difficult question. It really depends on the content and what I'm hoping to get out of it. I think if it's a non-fiction title, I really like to take my time with it. And I think this is a conversation you and I have had in the past where I will read fiction very fast. Like if I pick it up and within the first 4 or 5 pages, the writer can hook me, that's it. I will abandon everything else in my life and read this book. I have no self-control when it comes to staying up late.
Very bad for business.
Yeah, I know. I will stay up to like 4 or 5 trying to like finish this book. My eyelids will be drooping, but I'm like, no, I need to know what happens next. But when it comes to non-fiction titles, then I tend to take my time, like because I really want to absorb the information that I'm consuming, especially when it comes to self-help or a book that I'm trying to learn something from. So at the moment, I'm currently halfway through this book called The Artist's Way, which is a book written by Julia Cameron, who created this method of productivity and creativity, of enhancing your creativity. And that's something that I have been taking my time with because it's a lot of self-reflection. So you read and you reflect and you journal about it. And that's something that I know I'm going to take my time with this particular book.
But you've been reading it as part of a reading group.
I've been reading it as part of the group, but I have fallen behind. And I know that a couple of other people in the group have also fallen behind. And that's part of what she says is inevitably going to happen. So I think that once I finish the group, I will continue to do it on my own as well.
What do you find valuable about this book?
So she talks about creativity as a path to spirituality, which is something that I really resonated with. She has 2 key fundamentals that she talks about when it comes to tapping into that innate creativity that we all have. One is morning pages. So the first thing when you wake up every morning, you do 3 pages of free flow journaling. And it's kind of whatever, pops into your head, whatever it is that you need to get out of your system to be able to focus on the task that you have on that day. And the other is a once a week solo artist date, which is something that you go out and do to nourish yourself creatively. And that's something you do by yourself. So these 2 tools together, one is to empty your head and one is to fill it. And it's something that I have attempted in the past on my own, but it wasn't until I joined the reading group that I really felt the benefits of it. But, life happens and there's lots of stuff that's been going on. So I've kind of fallen off the wagon a little bit, but I'm hoping to get back on this week.
We're actually going to start our own series of workshops for The Artist's Way next month.
In late September, yeah.
Oh, yes. This will probably be out in September. This episode will be out in September. Yes. I think it's been really interesting experimenting with different formats of reading. I tend to think of it as a very solo activity. But we've been doing book clubs. Well, we stopped since Circuit Breaker, but we tried it a few times before. And we also host the Queer Women's Book Club at our bookstore. And it's been really interesting for me to experience reading as a group activity because I think I see myself as quite a introvert, or at least like someone who likes a lot of alone time, and reading is nice because you can do that. But it was always very interesting to hear what other people have to say about the book. Have you experienced that your reading of The Artist's Way has changed based on being in the group or reading it by yourself?
So the book is split into chapters that you have to read weekly. So once a week, we have a Zoom chat where we all come together and we discuss our findings from the last week and what our experiences were. And knowing that I need to come into this group with something to say or be able to at least know what the other people are talking about has definitely put that pressure to read at least read the chapter.
So it's like school, a
little bit.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's a lot of like self-reflection, and sometimes it can get a bit heavy depending on the chapter. There was a chapter that made you reflect on your relationship as an artist with money. And I know that was something that for a couple of people in the group was really difficult because sometimes monetizing your art or what you perceive as your creative output can be very challenging. There was a chapter on recovering a sense of safety when it comes to producing creatively. And that was particularly difficult for me. I think this particular book and the course that we are planning to launch as well is a lot about what you put in it. If you're willing to put yourself as much as you want to in it, like if you're willing to go deep and uncover a lot of, you know, your creative blocks, you will get a lot of output. But if it's something that you're doing purely for the sake of scratching the surface, then that's probably what you'll get in return also.
Yeah, I guess I asked that question because I've been thinking a lot of the Moon as a space for community. Like, we are a bookstore, you can come in, pick up a book and leave, but it also has the additional function of being a cafe and being a space for events. And we have regulars, we have people who keep coming back. I think you hired most of the staff because they just hung around the store.
Pretty much. They just wouldn't leave. So I was like, let me pay you to be here.
And we're actually coming up to our 2nd anniversary, which is on the 21st of September.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you had any thoughts on how we've evolved as a community space.
Oh my gosh. So I feel very grateful when I see a lot of our regulars come into the space, and because it makes me feel like what I set out to do, which was, you know, build a community space, have a place where people can feel comfortable enough that it can be their second home. They can feel free to express themselves or be themselves. And I see all of our regulars and a lot of our staff who come through as well. It makes me feel very grateful that what I set out to do ended up happening. There's always room for improvement, and I'm constantly working on, you know, ways to be better at what I do and provide a more holistic experience for our customers and for the staff as well. I think it's going to be a lifelong journey for me. But the 2 years have taught me so much, and I'm incredibly grateful for the community that we've built.
That's so heavy, man. I thought you were going to be like...
Sorry.
It's very cool when people tag us in Instagram photos.
Oh, wow. I mean, that is pretty cool, too.
No, this is a lifelong journey for me, and I've taken my vow of monkhood very seriously.
Oh, my God. Sorry, Ruby. But it's true. I do feel that strongly about what I do.
I mean, we do have a very fun job.
Yeah.
It's really dope to work at a bookstore.
We get to talk about books and drink coffee a lot of the time, so...
Yeah. We actually are planning a whole series of workshops for the anniversary and beyond. I guess we're taking our position as a space more seriously.
I think the circuit breaker definitely helped to help me think about things in a different way, because I was so focused on creating a physical space that I kind of neglected our potential audience that, you know, we might be able to tap into overseas and in different parts of the world, or people who just can't make it down physically. And I think the circuit breaker has made me think about it in a different way, that, you know, we've built a physical space for 2 years now. Now, how can we grow beyond that? How can we engage with people who believe in the ideology of what we're trying to do, but who might not be based in Singapore, or who, like I said, physically cannot come down to the store? So trying to be a little bit more inclusive in the way that we think of our strategy with events going forward is something that I'm really looking forward to.
Do you want to share some of our plans for the events?
We are working on a series called Personal Space, which is kind of like a sound meditation, but in a group. So you have a little space. We have a couple of people coming in to play records and really soothing, calming music. So you can choose to sit down, meditate, journal, read, or just hang out in the space. It's a work in progress. We did a trial run just last night, so we're still working on it. But stuff like that. And then thinking about, right, we have this space. We're doing something physically. How can we take this and engage a wider audience? So is it doing a recording, doing a video, sending, having an online setup as well where we're streaming it? So these are all the conversations that we are trying to have with all of our events and things that we put forward going into the next couple of months.
Can you share who we're collaborating with yet?
Yeah, we are working with the Analog Vault.
Cool.
So I'm really excited to be working with those guys.
What else do we have in store for the anniversary month, September? I am working on a subscription box that will be, I guess, a monthly shipment of books and merchandise. I'm very excited about it because I think there are always new arrivals that I want everyone to read, and I can't convince every customer to read it. But if they sign up for the subscription box, I can foist it upon them. That's the plan. Yeah, and it will be nice for us to showcase some of the merch brands that we've gotten to collaborate with recently.
Yeah, we've recently reached out to a couple of artists and makers within the community and engaged with them to do custom merchandise, products, something that lets them showcase their craft, but then also creates a limited edition product for us to be able to offer to our customers. And I think the first of those will be launching in September, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think we're timing it for the anniversary.
Yeah, and we'll be doing a giveaway for one of those items as well, so you can keep an eye out on our socials if you're interested in participating.
I'm honestly so relieved because I thought we were going to close down during the circuit breaker.
I was terrified too. I was so scared that we were going to have to close down.
But just in the couple of weeks after the circuit breaker, all of these plans started happening. We were very lucky to be invited by Singapore Community Radio to do the podcast, and we've got like tons of other things in the works. So I don't think we're closing down, or at least if we are, like you're working us very hard.
I'm doing my best. I'm literally doing my very best.
Okay, I want to wrap up the podcast, but I wanted to leave on one last question. What are you reading right now?
Like 5 different books.
Which okay, name them.
To talk about?
No, name them all.
Oh my god, okay, I started reading The Priory of the Orange Tree. I'm only like 3 pages in, so there's not much that I can say about that. I'm reading The Artist's Way, and then oh my god, you really put me on the spot here, Ruby.
How do you not know what you're reading, dude?
Because I'm reading a lot of things. You see the number of books in this house?
Yeah, we're actually recording this in Sarah's house, and it's piles and piles of books.
It's horrendous. I am a terrible hoarder when it comes to books.
Okay, Sarah can't remember right now, but maybe I can talk about what I'm reading. I'm reading Stitched Up, which is an anti-capitalist book of fashion. By the time this episode's out, I think this book will be in the store. I'm reading Dune, as I mentioned. I'm reading draft number 4, which is by John McPhee, who's a longtime contributor to The New Yorker, and it's him writing about writing and writing about being in the magazine world. This was actually recommended to me by a customer last week, and I'm really enjoying it. I love it when customers recommend books, so I think that will also be in store soon. I'm also reading... Never mind. I'm reading a lot of things.
I'm not the only one who forgot what I'm reading.
No, I don't want to tell you guys what I'm reading. It's embarrassing.
No, come on. You have to tell us now.
Well, I'm reading the bullet journal method.
Okay.
I still have like the last...
Is it the one that I lent you?
Yeah, the last quarter of it to get through. I don't really read self-help books, so I think the tone of it is grating me a little bit. Yeah, and then the last one I'm reading is Mating in Captivity, which is a book about relationships.
I love that.
I just decided to branch out and see what was out there.
I'm excited to see what you learn from it.
Yeah, no, I think like there is definitely space for the moon to branch out to that kind of stuff too. I think I usually wrote it off as like, oh, any sort of book about sex and dating is dumb. But that's obviously not true because it's a huge industry.
It's
so
really not.
We are going to wade through and see if we can find any good ones and bring them into the store.
Sounds great.
Yeah,
I'm looking forward to that.
Cool.
Thanks, Ruby.
Thanks, Sarah. That wraps up the first episode of the podcast. If you're interested in the work that we're doing, you can always come visit us at 37 Mosque Street, or you can follow us on Instagram at TheMoonSG, or sign up to our newsletter via email and catch us online at themoon.com.sg. Cool. Let me know via Instagram DMs or email if there's anyone you'd like us to speak to, or if you have any suggestions for future episodes. Thank you.